Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Human Stories, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The front door shuddered when Adam's shoulder hit it. I stumbled backward into the foyer, the old pine floor flexing under my heels. The deadbolt snapped from the outside. His shadow filled the frosted glass for a breath, broad and patient, then slid away. My landline knocked off the hallway table, hit the floor hard enough to burst apart. The handset skittered under the coat rack. Plastic ribs and copper wiring glinted like a broken insect. "Don't wait up," he said through the door, voice flat. The porch boards creaked, tires crushed gravel. Silence came down like snow. I stood there, the chill of December seeping from the jam into my palms. The house did its familiar settling, one long sigh from the ridge beam, then nothing but the distant drone of a grain dryer across the river. I picked up the pieces of the phone and set them in a bowl on the entry bench. It was the same bowl Adam had made in ninth grade art, lopsided, glazed, a stubborn blue. The irony didn't land, nothing did. Half the county knows this house by its porch swing. White clapboard, 3 windows facing the road, a freezer humming in the mudroom. My husband built the swing before he left and never came back. I learned how to replace the chain. I learned how to do a lot of things. For 30 years, I worked nights at the Bluebird Diner off Route 50. Coffee refills, hash browns pie by the slice, and took in upholstery repairs at my kitchen table after church. Folks brought me cracked vinyl boat seats and torn RV cushions. I kept my hands busy. It kept the lights on. When Adam was 8, I bought him sneakers he didn't dare ask for. White with a flash of red on the heel. The clerk laced them slow like a ritual. I told him they were for Jim. He wore them to bed the first night. In those days, I thought love was a list: shoes, school supplies, permission slips, a ride to practice a birthday cake baked from scratch, even when your feet feel like 2 sacks of gravel. He grew. That's what boys do. There were science fair boards and a used clarinet he swore he'd play, and a summer where the 2 of us built a balsa wood bridge so strong the teacher had to borrow weights from the auto shop. I took a GED class at the high school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, sat in the back, kept my head down, dropped it again when Adam caught the flu and I missed 2 exams. Some things you return to, some things you let go. I didn't mind the work. Not the late nights, not the diner coffee burning dark in the pot, not the cracked knuckles in February when the fabric stapler bit back. When Adam talked about civil engineering at the state school, I said yes before he finished the sentence. We put the tuition on whatever we could put it on. I ate toast for dinner a lot that year. He walked at graduation in a pressed gown, his hair too long and his smile too wide, and every sacrifice felt like a porch light you switch on and leave. He moved an hour south for a job with a contractor that did bridges over the Ohio. He came up most Sundays, sometimes with Brianna. She had a pretty laugh and a habit of glancing at herself in the window while she talked. Her mother, Vivian Cole, shook my hand at a church potluck and said, "You must be the famous Nora," like she was handing me a prize ribbon and taking it back in the same motion. The green bean casserole I brought went home half-eaten. Vivian's lemon bars disappeared to a whisper. People who win at everything always bring lemon bars. They were going skiing in Aspen the week before Christmas. Brianna showed me her parka on her phone, white cinched at the waist. "It's investment dressing," she said. Adam watched her, not me. They talked about homeowners, associations, and gated neighborhoods as if fences could keep the weather out. On my porch afterward, Adam cleared his throat and said he needed boundaries. It wasn't a conversation. It was a word he'd learned on a podcast and set down between us like a traffic cone. He started to talk in a new register. Senior living community became the phrase of choice wrapped in good intentions, tied off with the promise of amenities. When I had the flu in November, Brianna texted me a clinic address and a winking face, then posted a boomerang from Denver International, clinking glasses, the caption, "Blessed." He'd asked to borrow $7,500 in the summer company car deposit, he said, and I wrote a check that felt like prying off floorboards. 3 months tops, he promised. I stopped asking around Halloween. In the foyer, I lifted the blue-glazed bowl and carried it into the kitchen. The sun had slid behind bare oaks by the creek. Light from the sink window went gray. I set the bowl beside the toaster and wiped the counter with the heel of my hand. The water in the kettle took its time the way things do when you're watching them. I didn't think about calling anyone. Even if I had the line to the outside world lay in pieces on a hall bench, blue as a bruise. A truck downshifted on County Road 12. I knew the rhythm of every driver within 2 miles who rides the brake, who coasts. The winter air smelled like wood smoke and diesel. I took my tea, black always have, and leaned on the counter while the steam rose. A pair of sparrows flitted to the empty feeder, and away again, little ghosts of movement. The house breathed. Under the stairs there's a narrow door with a stubborn hinge. It sticks when the humidity climbs and loosens up again in December. I keep spare light bulbs in there's albums, a rolled-up runner. I kneeled on the runner now and reached far back for the cigar box that belonged to my father. It doesn't hold cigars. It holds old bank envelopes, a handful of folded receipts, a thumb drive the color of a robin's egg, and the instruction booklet for a doorbell camera I never installed because the bracket wouldn't sit flush on clapboard. I put the box on the kitchen table and lifted the lid. Paper has weight to it when you've carried the same debts for years. Across the table, a stack of vinyl swatches waited where I'd left them. I was in the middle of a Chevy bench seat from the 70s, foam, recut foam, dust everywhere. The customer wanted something that won't show ketchup. I could do that in my sleep. My hands know their job. Staple pull flip. Some skills outlast almost everything. The kettle clicked off. I poured. The tea was too hot and tasted like the iron in our pipes, which is to say it tasted like this house. I drank anyway. A draft crept along the floor from the back door and pressed against my ankles. On the fridge, a magnet from Mammoth Cave held up a shopping list I'd started and never finished: onions, paper towels, salt. There are lists that make a day easier and lists that can't. The porch swing knocked once against the railing and stilled. Dusk had a way of swallowing the road, the fields, even the barn across the creek. You can stand at the sink and almost convince yourself the world stops at your property line, which is both the comfort and the trick of a small town. In the glass, my face looked like my mother's. I rinsed the cup, dried it, set it upside down on the rack. In the front room, the Christmas quilt lay folded over the back of the sofa, red ticking stripes, and holly calico I'd pieced in a year, when Adam still believed in Santa because I did. The ceramic bowl on the entry bench gleamed like a small moon. I closed the stair closet and slid the bolt. Boards answered boards. The lights made their quiet hum. I sat at the kitchen table with the cigar box open and let my hands rest palm to palm until the warmth left the cup and the house returned to itself. By morning, the bowl of busted phone parts sat on the entry bench like a still life no one would paint. Frost skinned the porch steps. I boiled eggs, fed the cat, that isn't mine, and stitched the torn seam on a Chevy bench until the sun had lifted above the cottonwoods. The bell over the front door of the house, an old diner bell I'd hung for company, shivered twice, and Adam walked in without knocking, the cold riding his coat. Brianna followed with a cardboard carrier of coffees from the new place in town, where drinks have names like Maple Fog. I figured you'd want a latte, she said, handing me a cup I didn't ask for. Oat milk, better for your age. Adam looked at the blue bowl and looked away. You should get that fixed. I tried, I said. It didn't take. They smiled like people do before they tell you the bad news is really good news. Brianna set her purse on the chair as if it had a reserve sign. We've been looking at comps, she said, bright. River County's exploding. Investors from Cincinnati, even Louisville. If you freshen the place foundation, some staging, you could pull 380 easy. Freshen, I said. Paint the exterior a neutral, Adam added. HOA standards in gristmill meadows require cedar tone or white, but buyers respond to slate. This isn't in the HOA. That's the point, Brianna said, leaning forward like she was telling me a secret. You're not in one, and yet you can sell to people who live as if they are. Aspirational. It's a thing. Adam slid a folded sheet across the table. We put together a list, stuff you need to think about. I opened it. The title read, Things Mom Needs in Neat School Project Font. Bullet points marched down updated meds, nutrition counseling, transportation plan, medical alert pendant decluttering service. At the bottom, a starred item, memory care options evaluate. I remember just fine, I said. Everyone says that. Brianna answered quickly, then softened her voice. It's not about judgment, it's about safety. Adam tapped the paper. There's a RSVP open house at River Glen Senior Living. Gated, on-site physio activities. Bingo, I asked. Water aerobics, Brianna said as if she'd discovered fire. I took a sip of the latte, which tasted like cake batter on a dare. The house carried the smell of old wood and coffee and the vinyl I'd been cutting. Outside, a truck rattled past with a bed full of split oak. You two gonna stay the day I asked? I've got a bench to finish. Brianna reached into her purse and produced a slim folder with a bank logo I recognized. She laid it beside the list, one corner aligned with the checked tablecloth. This is just a convenience document, she said. If, say, a credit card expires or there's a bank error while you're napping, not that you nap, we can call on your behalf. Saves you the hassle of sitting on hold. I read the title, Durable Power of Attorney. It's very standard, she said, tapping her nail on a signature line. Vivian does this for her father. Adam tried for light. We'd never abuse it. It's just adulthood paperwork. I can read, I said. An echo of the diner ran through me, tourists ordering things not on the menu and calling it choice. I closed the folder, slid it back, refolded the list along its crease. Leave those, I said. I'll think. Soon Adam said too fast. Just with the market. The market isn't my landlord. Brianna's smile tightened. We're trying to make your life easier. I'm not sure you know what my life is. They stayed 12 minutes, no coats off, and left 2 full coffees on the counter. After the door shut, the bell stilled. I put their folder in the junk drawer with birthday candles and rubber bands that have lost their stretch. The list I folded again and tucked in the cigar box under the stairs, because paper has a way of finding its own level. By afternoon, a fever climbed the back of my neck like a hand. My chest tightened and coughed dry. The stove clock read 2:17, and I told myself it was the dust from foam, but the ache behind my eyes said otherwise. I rinsed my cup, grabbed my coat, and drove to the clinic off State Road 11, where the parking lot was half full, and the automatic door wheezed like a smoker. The waiting room smelled like disinfectant and peppermint hand lotion. A television on the wall showed a baking show with the sound off, and words crawling under a man sprinkling powder sugar on a cake shaped like a castle. A woman in scrubs took my temperature and said, "You poor thing," in the practiced way people in scrubs do. I filled out a clipboard form that asked if I'd fallen in the past year. I had not, but I'd been pushed by circumstance enough to count. Across from me, a man my age cradled his arm in a sling while his daughter in a university sweatshirt filled his water cup. A little boy in dinosaur pajamas slept with his mouth open. The nurse practitioner listened to my lungs and said, "Likely flu. Rest. Hydrate. If you get worse, come back." The pharmacy bag rattled in my purse like a warning. When I stepped outside, the air cut clean through the fever and the trees shone that uncompromising winter gold. I stood at the curb a minute, weighing whether to call Adam. Then I remembered the blue glazed bowl and the way he'd looked through me this morning as if I were a window. I walked to the edge of the lot and pulled out my keys. Before I reached the car, a hatchback eased to a stop beside me, and the passenger window rolled down. "Need a lift, Nora?" Mrs. Patel called, cardigan button wrong in her hurry. I was picking up cat litter. "I've got mine," I said, patting my coat pocket like keys made a person brave. "You look peaked," she said, "please." We rode in companionable silence, heat on high. She drove like a person who trusts the world but not the other drivers. At the stop sign by the feed mill, she said, In this state, Adult Protective Services moves quickly when they have to. Keep that in your pocket, dear. What would I do with them? Just know the number, she said. Sometimes a number is a kind of shelter. Back home, she came in unbuttoning and rebuttoning her sweater. She put the kettle on without asking and lined up the pharmacy bottles, reading the labels like they were recipes. I'll leave you soup, she said, producing a plastic container from her tote. It's not spicy. Sanjay can't handle spice. He's very American for a man from Ahmedabad. We laughed softly and then didn't. She glanced at the entry bench at the tidy blue wreckage in the bowl and rested her hand on my forearm. You are not alone, Nora. Not here. After she left, the house felt warmer where her kindness had been. The fever tugged me toward the couch, but the cigar box on the table held me in the kitchen. I lifted the lid and took out the robin's egg thumb drive and the doorbell camera instructions. The bracket had never sat right on clapboard. A man at the hardware store had said I'd need to plane a shim or mount to the door trim. I set the metal bracket against the indoor side of the front door instead and saw how it could rest on a crosspiece if I used wood screws I already owned. I fetched my drill from the hall closet, drilled slow and listened to the house talk back in small, splintered whispers. The camera clicked into place with a neat, satisfied sound. I ran the wire along the hinge side and into the outlet strip behind the umbrella stand. On the kitchen table, I opened my old county library laptop, the one Adam said was a security risk, and let it whir itself awake. The library had given out mobile hotspots during lockdown. Mine still blinked patient blue. I typed slower than I staple. I made a password out of a sentence no one living knows. The company's portal asked me to name the device. I called it front door and watched a gray square turn to an image my entryway in winter light the bowl, the coat rack, the shadow of the porch swing sliding across the rug. When I clapped, the sound spiked in the little bar on the screen and settled again. I clicked the setting that sends a clip to the cloud when the camera hears raised voices. The word cloud made me think of the weather over the river, those big Midwestern mussel clouds shouldering east. I read until the lines blurred about what can be recorded in a person's own home about consent and signage and where the law draws its chalk marks. The medicine tugged at my bones and made me slow. I set the laptop to update, propped my elbows on the table, and stared at the folder with the bank's logo as if it might breathe. The durable power of attorney had a spot for today's date. The pen next to it had the bank's name in cheerful blue. I put both in a drawer and slid it shut. Before dark, the bell shivered again. I looked at the display on the laptop and saw Mrs. Patel at the door holding a bag that could only be soup and a wedge of cornbread. I let her in. She said she'd just forgotten to say one more thing and then forgot what it was, so she set the food on the counter and asked if my quilt needed mending. We sat a while without filling silence like a jar. After she left for the second time, I took 2 capsules with lukewarm tea and lay down on the sofa with a throw over my knees. Through the doorway, I could see the laptop's little screen dim and brighten with whatever the camera noticed, the swing moving a half-inch at the winter light easing. Somewhere past the creek, a siren climbed and fell the way sirens do when they're going towards somebody and then away. The fever settled into a steady thrum, not bad enough to take me under, just present like a drum in another room. At dusk, I rose, went to the sink, rinsed my cup, and stood there while the pipes clanged like polite applause. I thought about the list on the table this morning, the one with bullet points telling me what to need, and reached under the stair for the cigar box. I put the list on top, closed the lid, and wiped a thumbprint from the gloss with the tail of my sleeve. The bell over the door was still the porch swing, stiller, the whole place holding itself in that winter balance between giving and keeping. I turned off the kitchen light, and the house, without asking anyone's permission, turned solid around me. The fever broke in the night and left a salt line on my temple like I'd walked home through rain. Morning sat square on the porch, full of frost and purpose. I set the cigar box in my tote beside a zipper pouch of receipts and drove into town with the heater trying and failing to catch up. Clara Boone's office perched over the bakery on Main, where the air forever smells like sugar wanting to be something else. Her door stood open to a narrow room with law school diplomas in dark frames and a plant that looked too cheerful for January. Clara wore a navy sweater and the kind of gaze that finds the splinter without making you feel foolish. "Nora," she said as if she'd been expecting me. "Come sit." I set the tote at my feet and told the truth, some of it out loud, some of it in the way my hands wouldn't quite rest. I told her about the folder with the bank's logo and the list titled "Things Mom Needs," about the bowl of phone parts on the entry bench, and the way my son had started speaking in borrowed words. Clara didn't interrupt. She let silence do some work, the good kind. "Let's begin with capacity," she said finally. "You have it. I'll write that into anything we sign. And let's talk about what you want, not what anyone else has decided will be efficient." "I want my house to be mine," I said. "I want the paper to say what my mouth does." "Then we start there," she said, pulling a clean form onto a legal pad. "We revoke the prior will. We draft a new one. We appoint an agent you trust for medical decisions if you're unable. We put in writing that you do not grant financial control to anyone else unless you say so with witnesses and dates in the right places." "Witnesses," I said. "People who can look me in the eye and say I was awake. I keep a notary down the hall who does just that." She smiled. "What about your estate? You have a beneficiary in mind, River County Women's Trades Fund." I said, surprising myself with how long the name had been sitting in me ready. "For tool scholarships, sewing machines, welding masks, whatever gets hands paid." Clara wrote her pen, making a soft, sure scratch. "We can set that up to the letter," she said, "and we can document why. Not because of spite, because of choice." She glanced up. "If anyone tries to argue you're confused, we'll have their pictures arguing against them." I slid the receipts over a copy of the check for $7,500, the date circled in red. The clinic paperwork from last month stamped 2:24 p.m. She made a small stack, squared the corners. "Also," I said, "I read about recording in your own home." "You can," she said, "with limits. Keep signage near entrances. If you're concerned about elder financial abuse, document interactions. Keep originals off-site. Assume anything on paper can end up in court, and anything electronic should live someplace that will survive a thunderstorm." "I like things that survive storms," I said. She brought in the notary, a woman with gentle wrists who smelled like cinnamon. I initialed, signed, dated. Clara stapled the revocation to a copy of the old will, slid it into a file, and handed me a tidy envelope that weighed more than its paper. "Leave this with someone you trust," she said. "And Nora." "Yes?" "If anyone puts a document in front of you that you haven't run past as me, you set it down and call." "I can do that." Outside, the bakery had put out a tray of day-old oatmeal cookies, a little sign reading "Honor System." I slipped $1 in the jar and took one because a small sweetness can carry a morning better than a big one. Main Street shone brittle and bright. I drove home past the high school and the football field that stays green even when the town bleaches to bone. Thanksgiving landed like a parade you didn't ask to march in. Brianna invited me to their place in Gristmill Meadows, new build, gray siding, a door knocker shaped like a quill. Inside smelled like cinnamon sticks and new carpet. Vivian stood by the island with a stemless glass of wine dressed in cream that stayed cream no matter what life handed it. "We're so glad you could come," she said, the way a person might welcome a donation they think is smaller than it should be. There were people from Brianna's work and a cousin of Adam's from Louisville who talked about real estate like it was a mission field. I brought pumpkin bread baked in a pan older than anyone in the room. It sat by a plate of macarons that looked like they'd been flown in by helicopter. A football game murmured on a television no one watched. At the table, between a discussion of HOA fences and tax abatements, Brianna said lightly, "Mom's been misplacing things lately," and laughed just enough to make it a joke you weren't supposed to notice when it cut. Vivian squeezed my forearm and said, "It happens to all of us, which is how you make a sentence feel like a net." I forgot nothing but how to enjoy parsnips, I said, and smiled until my face softened the edges. Adam refilled my water and tapped the rim, twice a habit from when he was 10, and measuring liquids for a science kit. For a second, the boy I recognized stood there holding a pitcher. Then he set it down, and the man who talks about comps came back. When the plates cleared, a nephew wanted to see the garage, and Adam went to show him the built-in storage solution he'd bought with a discount from a job vendor. I stepped onto the back deck and breathed the kind of cold that gives you something for nothing. Brianna joined me with her glass, lightly clinking it against the rail. "You know," she said, watching her reflection in the sliding door, a staged home photograph's better. "Buyers can't see their life in someone else's clutter." "I thought they were buying a house," I said, "not a mirror." She laughed, pleased with herself. Inside, someone cheered for a play no one will remember. After pie, I thanked her for dinner. Adam walked me to the door and hugged me the way you hug a person your wife is watching you hug. He handed me a container of turkey and a folded schedule for a holiday preview at River Glen Senior Living. "Just go look," he said. "No one's committing you to anything." "I didn't enlist," I said. But I took the paper so we could both end the exchange with something in our hands. A week later, he stopped by to get his childhood trophy box from the attic metal stars for perfect attendance, a third-place ribbon for a county spelling bee where he'd dropped an extra N into cinnamon. He came in with his shoes loud opened and closed drawers he didn't need to open. On his way out, he used the tip of his boot to nudge my answering machine, the old beige one I never quite replaced, so it rocked and settled. "This belongs in a museum," he said, and when I didn't answer, he picked it up, flipped it in his palm, and dropped it. The plastic cracked across the top a line like lightning. He stared at the split and then up at me like I'd willed it there. "You didn't have to do that," I said, keeping my voice level and my hands at my sides. "It was already broken," he said, which is another way of calling a thing inevitable so you don't have to admit you touched it. The doorbell camera caught the words, "the drop, the open door, the slam." I watched the clip twice at the kitchen table, listened to the sound of cheap plastic giving way, and made a note on an index card. 12:03:4:11 p.m. answering machine. The pen left a groove I could feel with my thumb. I called the River County Gazette and asked for Mike Larson. He's the reporter who wrote about the feed mill fire and got the timeline right when everyone else got it heroic. We met at a booth at the Bluebird in the lull between lunch and supper, the waitress refilling my coffee, without asking the cook in back, banging lids like cymbals. Mike carried a notebook and a face that looks like it was made to nod. I told him about the folder, the list, the breakage that tries to pass as accident. He asked for dates and times as carefully as a person takes measurements for a suit. He wrote down Aspen and drew an arrow to the clinic timestamp. He wrote down 7,500 and underlined it once. "Public records are polite if you know how to ask," he said. "Permits, court filings, social posts people forget they made. I won't print anything you don't want me to." "I don't know what I want," I said. "Sometimes you start with what you don't," he said, and closed his notebook, because some things need to sit. At home, I cleared the facement like you clear a kitchen table when you need to cut fabric. Everything off, wipe down, start fresh. The bulb on the pull chain hummed and flickered, then settled into the color of old honey. I moved the laundry basket, slid the Christmas totes to the corner, and hung a roll of white butcher paper along the far wall with blue painter's tape. On the left, I taped the copy of the check and a printout of my bank statement with the relevant line highlighted withdrawal, 7/12. First River Bank, $7,500. Below that, the calendar page where I'd written flu and clinic and the time. To the right, a screenshot from Brianna's account with 2 champagne flutes clinking in an airport lounge, the date stamp sitting there like a dare. I printed the frame from the door camera and wrote "dropped answering machine" in block letters I could read from across the room. I pinned the Thanksgiving program Brianna had handed out place cards, a menu in a font that wanted you to think of Paris, and circled the word gratitude where it drifted in the design like a leaf. Beneath it on a separate line, I wrote memory care mentioned at table. I drew arrows. I wrote questions I meant only for myself. On a low shelf, I set the cigar box now, repurposed as a drawer for small proofs, the list titled Things Mom Needs, the bank's durable power of attorney. I had not signed a flash drive labeled front door in my own block letters. I put a notebook next to it and wrote down where everything else lived. Clara's envelope with Mrs. Patel, the duplicate in the safe deposit box, the password scrawled inside a recipe book under the flap for coconut pie. I added a photograph from July that I'd taken of my forearm with a yellowed bruise shaped like an oak leaf. Adam had grabbed me hard when I tried to lift a box he insisted was his to lift, and then he'd said, "Don't be dramatic," and I'd gone to the bathroom and raised my arm to the mirror and pressed the button because a camera knows when to look. I taped that up too a little lower and felt the room tilt toward me, not away. The basement smelled like laundry soap in the damp that never quite leaves a house built before air conditioning. The furnace kicked on with a soft whoomp, and the ductwork answered back in clicks a sound I've known longer than most people I've loved. I stood in the center of the floor and looked at the wall, the way a person looks at a map before a drive, seeing the routes that make sense and the ones that don't. Upstairs, the bell over the front door stirred a little in a draft, then went still. I washed my hands at the utility sink, the water iron-rich and cold enough to pinch, and dried them on a shop towel with my name sewn into the corner. Back in the kitchen, I tucked the notebook under the phone book I keep because some numbers feel better on paper. The house held quiet the way a jar holds beans with purpose with a lid that fits. I turned off the basement light and closed the door, and the latch found itself the first try. They came on a Saturday when the frost hadn't yet lifted off the pasture. The doorbell camera blinked awake, the little bar on my laptop rose and fell with the thud of boots on the porch and the shake of the bell as the door swung wide. Nora Adam called, stepping inside like the house had always been his. Brianna followed in a cream coat that wouldn't survive a county winter, a glossy folder tucked tight under her arm. "In the kitchen," I said. The kettle was breathing toward a boil. I set 3 cups on the counter, turned the flame low, and let the room hold its own quiet while they found their places. Brianna tapped the folder smile, bright enough to sell real estate. "We stopped by River Glen. They have a holiday preview tomorrow. 2-bed units, South Light. The chef does rosemary chicken on Sundays." "Chicken is chicken," I said. Adam laid a printout on the table, letterhead from a contractor I didn't know. "They can swing by next week. Quick assessment. Nothing invasive, just numbers to work with." "Numbers," I said. He spread more papers, comps in tidy columns, the phrase "tear down" whispering under an estimate for site prep. Brianna turned to the window and eyed the backyard like a surveyor mapping a future that didn't have me in it. "Open plan," she said to the glass. "Buyers want flow." I set their coffees down and slid a single sheet from my own folder across the table. "Since we're doing paperwork," I said. Adam read the header aloud before his voice dropped. "Last will and testament of Nora Whitaker." His eyes ran past the lines the way a person scans a menu for a price point first. He found what I'd made easy to find. I, the undersigned, do name my son, Adam Whitaker, as personal representative and sole heir. The signature line was a neat blank. The date line waited like a mouth. Brianna's shoulders released a fraction. "Good," she said too quickly. "That's sensible." Adam cleared his throat. "This means a lot, Mom." He pressed the paper flat with his palm as if to smooth the air. "We'll keep the place in the family." "You said tear down," I reminded him. "That's about resale," Brianna said, already sliding the page back into her folder. "You don't have to worry about those details." The kettle clicked off. I let the silence sit long enough to mean something, then lifted the corner of the draft. "There's one more thing I want to show you," I said. "Granddad's old level is downstairs. Adam, you used to play with it, remember?" Thought the bubble was a marble. If suspicion crossed Brianna's face, she covered it by adjusting a bracelet. Adam, who'd never liked the basement as a boy, followed because he believed a page had settled the matter upstairs. The stairlight put a ring of honey on the treads. The air was laundry soap and earth. At the bottom, the room opened the way cellars do. Low square stitched with ductwork. Against the far wall, my butcher paper held its map dates, Arrows, images, the stubborn logic of proof. On the folding table, the library laptop glowed open to a tiled screen of faces. Clara Boone lifted a hand from her office, a law book splayed under her elbow. A man with a county badge on his sweater, Dion Hurley, adult, protective services, sat in a cubicle that looked like it had grown in a government building in 1978. Mike Larson's window framed the back booth at the Bluebird Coffee at his right pencil behind his ear. In the far left tile, the camera in my kitchen showed the blue bowl on the entry bench and the stairwell doorway where we hadn't yet reappeared. The words recording and a small red dot glowed in the corner. "What is this?" Brianna said, making it a statement. "Hi, Adam," Clara said, as if they'd met at the hardware store. "Ms. Cole." Dion's voice had the even weight of someone who says hard things for a living without making them heavier. "Good morning." Adam kept his eyes on me. "Ma." I stepped to the wall. "This is July 12th, I said, pointing to the copy of the withdrawal slip, the check for $7,500, the notation in my hand. "This is November 23rd clinic at 2:24 p.m. I tapped the printed screenshot flutes of champagne in an airport lounge, Brianna's caption hovering over her own smile. "This is December 3rd. I pressed my finger to the still from the door camera, Adam's hand midair the answering machine at the start of his brief flight. The caption I'd written in block letters read, "Dropped answering machine, 4:11 p.m. "That was an accident," he said, automatic as a turn signal. "The sound it made says otherwise," Mike said gently from his square, not looking up from his notebook. Brianna crossed her arms. "You can't record us. It's illegal." "In my home it's not," I said. I nodded to the small placard I taped inside the entry, a simple black font on white paper, audio/video recording on premises. "There's a sign at the door. You walked past it twice." Dion leaned forward just enough. "Ms. Cole, this is notice. Keep your remarks clear." Brianna wavered, then tilted toward indignation. "This entire thing is to ambush us, to make us look like villains. We brought coffee." "Paper first," I said. I picked up the single page they'd admired upstairs, the one with the pretty header and the blank lines, and set it beside a sealed envelope stamped with a file number and Clara's firm's return address. What you read was a draft, something anyone could type. I touched the envelope. "This is the will." Clara nodded. "Executed, witness notarized, capacity statement attached, revocation of prior instruments complete." I slid the real copy out so the words lay in full light. "I, the undersigned, do leave the whole of my estate to the River County Women's Trades Fund," I read, "for scholarships, tools, and training." I set my finger under the line that named the fund, then under the place where my signature sat in ink that had dried to a soft shine. Adam's mouth opened and closed twice. "You lied to me," he said finally, voice gone thin at the edges. "I didn't sign your draft," I said, "that's all." Brianna's hand found the table edge. "This is vindictive," she said, "after everything we've done to help." Clara's voice didn't change. "We are not litigating motives in a basement on a Saturday." Adam took a step toward me. Dion moved in his square like a chair had scraped just off camera. The ductwork pinged with the heat kicking on. "You can't just—" Adam started. "I can, and I did," I said. "Because this house is mine and my name goes on the paper that says what happens to it." Brianna turned to the laptop, angling herself as if a camera were a person she could sway. "We love Nora. We're trying to keep her safe." "In the draft you brought," I said, reaching for the other folder they'd laid upstairs but not brought down. "There's a durable power of attorney with your name on it." I lifted my eyes. "That's not safety. That's access." Mike wrote that phrase down without looking like he was writing. Dion said, "Ms. Whitaker, do you feel pressured to transfer control of finances or housing?" "I feel told what to need," I said. A floorboard creaked above us. The bell over the front door jostled. Mrs. Patel's voice floated down the stairs, small and sure. "I brought the spare key you lent me, Nora. I'm staying right here by the kettle if anyone wonders." Clara smiled with her eyes. "That counts as a witness to presence." Adam rubbed his jaw, a gesture from being 12 and trying to pull a lie back into his mouth. This is gonna ruin me, he said, and the word me hung in the room until the furnace fan took it and thinned it. It will document you, Mike said, pencil waiting. Brianna stepped toward the wall and picked up the photo of the bruise. This could be anything, she said, and then read the date I'd written in the border. She put it back like it had burned her thumb. Upstairs, the front door opened again on a colder draft and a heavier step. The bell gave a startled single chime. 2 voices, young careful, announced themselves from the foyer. The camera in the kitchen caught dark uniforms and county patches. Down here, I called, and the sound of my voice on the laptop rebounded a half-second later, like the house had answered me. The deputies came down the steps sideways, hands open, eyes doing the slow professional sweep. The shorter one, Roberts, according to his badge, took in the wall, the table, the laptop, the faces inside it. "Ma'am," he said to me, "we had a call from Adult Protective Services about a welfare check. We can take statements if that's helpful." "It is," Clara said from her square. "Officers, you should know there is recorded audio and video relevant to property damage and intimidation." Roberts nodded once, the way a person nods when the shape of a thing matches what the call said it would be. His partner, Singh, opened a small notebook. "We'll need dates, times, and any copies you can provide," Singh said. "We can issue an incident number today." Adam took a breath that sounded like he'd swallowed ice. "This is family," he said to the deputies, as if saying it might change the edges. Roberts kept his voice even. "That's why we're here." Singh asked to see the answering machine clip. I cued it on the laptop, the fall and the crack, and Adam's words clear as new glass. The deputies didn't react more than a line of pencil might show. They asked if the machine itself was in the house, and I led Singh upstairs to the entry bench. He lifted the broken beige box into an evidence bag as carefully as I used to carry Adam's fever thermometer to the sink. When we came back down, Roberts had written our names and the date across the top of a form. He handed Adam and Brianna each a copy of the county's brochure on domestic incidents paper, the color of oatmeal with phone numbers that start with 555. Dion's tile on the laptop blinked. He'd stepped away to another case or a coffee, then returned the way officials do, steady to the point of anonymous. "We'll file this afternoon," Roberts said, tearing a carbon sheet in one clean sound. "If you'd like to pursue a protection order, Ms. Whitaker, the clerk's office, can explain the process." He set the incident number on the table, aligning it with the edge like it mattered how paper sits in a room. "Do you want to make a statement now?" "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake. I told them what happened like I was reading from a recipe I'd had memorized for years, and only now wrote down. The door shoved the deadbolt from the outside, the bowl of phone parts, the list titled, "Things Mom Needs," the draft with my son's name where mine belongs. They asked the questions that fix a day to a calendar: when, who, how loud. I answered. When they were done, Singh capped his pen. "We'll be on our way," he said. "You have our cards." "Thank you," Clara said from the laptop with a small wave. Mike touched his pencil to the paper and drew a short line that stood for something he'd understood and didn't need to say out loud. Mrs. Patel clinked a teaspoon against a mug upstairs, the universal punctuation of kitchens. Roberts and Singh climbed the steps. The bell chimed, the front door closed, and the house folded itself back into its winter shape. Adam looked at the wall one more time as if a map might have grown a road he could take. Brianna straightened the sleeve of her coat that didn't belong to this county and found her composure where she'd left it, in posture, not in apology. I shut the laptop lid. The red dot went dark. The basement light hummed on its chain. We stood in the quiet basement air long enough to feel the weight of what paper can hold. Then we went upstairs because there are only so many minutes a person can spend underground on a Saturday when the frost is lifting and the kettle wants to sing. The Gazette ran it on a Wednesday when the sky sat low and clean over the river. Someone left the paper on my porch steps folded to the local section. Mike Larson's byline rested above a column of plain type and a photo of a front door that looked like mine because it was. He'd called the piece what it was and nothing more. At the Bluebird copies lay by the register next to a glass jar of peppermint sticks. Customers read between bites and didn't look around to see who else was reading. The bell made its little ring. The griddle hissed. The town did what towns do with news that comes from their own street. It absorbed it without a lot of noise. The phone on the kitchen wall, new, smooth, reliable, stayed mostly quiet. Clara emailed incident numbers in a line that said, "Paper filed, keep copies where we discussed." Dion from APES left a message with his hours. Mrs. Patel knocked most days, bringing something small, a pint of milk, a handful of clothespins, a book of crossword puzzles with half of Monday finished. She put the kettle on without asking, as if the stove were a thing the neighborhood shared. The house warmed differently when she sat in it, like it remembered how people add heat from the inside. Adam stopped showing up on the porch with Brianna. Then Brianna stopped showing up anywhere near my porch at all. Word carried over pie at church and between fuel pumps at the Sinclair had it that Adam's company put him on leave, that Brianna's bosses cut her hours down to 0 pending review. None of that came from their mouths. The only thing that came from Adam was a single text at 1:12 a.m. "Can we talk?" I let it sit there until morning and then let it sit longer. The will lived where it should. Clara had filed notarized cross-referenced. The envelope with the copy stayed at Mrs. Patel's under a stack of seed catalogs, a hiding place that felt less like hiding and more like belonging. In the evenings, the radio sometimes ran a spot about the River County Women's Trades Fund. An anonymous gift had started a small pool for apprenticeship tools. Applications open at the library. They read the library's hours twice. I rinsed a cup and pictured a girl I'd never meet picking up a new pair of snips or a welding mask and walking into a shop like she'd been invited. In the first snow, I finished the Chevy bench. The vinyl smoothed under my palms the way a lake goes still after a gust. I loaded the seat into the back of a farmer's truck while his red heeler watched from the cab. He paid in cash and half a dozen eggs, which is as good a measure of trust as any. When I came back in, I placed the money in the old cigar box, now just a box, and slid the eggs into the refrigerator between a jar of pickles and a block of cheddar. The door shut with the rubbery kiss of a thing that knows its job. One afternoon, the bell shook, and Adam stood on the porch with his hands tucked into the sleeves of a jacket that had lost its confidence. No Brianna. No folder. Just a wind-stung face and a shape of a man who hadn't slept well. I opened the door the way you open a door in winter, just wide enough not to waste the heat. "Mom," he said, and the word didn't try to pull anything with it. "I'm sorry." He looked past me into the kitchen as if apology might be visible on the counter. "I lost the job," he said. Brianna moved back with her mother for a while. The porch boards carried his shifting weight down into the joists. Far off, a truck downshifted on the hill. He waited like he used to on the edge of a diving board, wanting to jump and afraid of the drop. "I believe you're sorry," I said. "I don't have anything else to add." "Could I just sit for a minute?" His eyes flicked toward the table, the stove, the chair he'd done homework at with a pencil clenched too tight. "You can stand where you are," I said. "You can talk. I'll listen." I kept my hand braced on the door, not because I thought he'd push it, but because muscle remembers. He talked in fits and starts, words like loose nails set down and picked up again. He said he should have listened sooner. He said he hadn't seen how things looked from where I stood. He said he missed Sunday afternoons before everything got complicated, and then stopped because the sentence had run out of breath. The cat that isn't mine wound once around his boots and then decided against involvement. "Boundaries aren't punishment," I said, and realized my voice was steady because the floor under it was. "They're just the edges of what a person can carry." He nodded like someone hearing a language he knew once and hadn't used in years. "Can I call you?" he asked finally, small as a summer question. "You can call," I said. "If I'm here, I'll answer. If I'm busy, I won't." It sounded plain because it was. We held there, a beat him on the plank, me on the tile, winter air balancing between us. He stepped back, hands still tucked away. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He went down the steps slow. The gravel shifted under his tires and the sound moved off through the cottonwoods and was gone. I closed the door and set the latch. The kettle had begun to whisper. I turned the flame up a notch. The radio on the windowsill murmured the farm report in a voice I've heard since the year Adam learned to tie his shoes. Snow licked at the window screens and then quit. I sorted the day-old mail on the counter circulars, a letter from the electric co-op, a postcard from the library advertising adult ed classes that included a basics course for small engines and another for bookkeeping. The porch swing knocked once and was still. I poured tea and carried it to the sink window. The yard wore the thin start of winter like gauze. The camera by the door blinked its quiet, patient green. Downstairs, the furnace breathed and the ductwork clicked, counting seconds in a language only houses keep. I cupped the mug and stood a while until the steam thinned and the glass fogged and cleared and the light lost its edge and laid itself flat across the table. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.